I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. The fellowship is sweeter just knowing you're near. It's so good to see you. I hope that it's clear. Everyone loves you. We're so glad you're here.
Okay, well, good morning. Or if I were in Japan, it would be Ohio. The reason I shared that is because we have a congregant who is in Japan as we speak. And Charles, I'm going to set your coffee over here. It is. It is. All right, so today's topic is idolatry. Wow, does that have anybody wondering what in the world she's talking about? You know, it seems to be one of those old-fashioned things, golden calves and the like, or idols that are as big as gigantic buildings. But truly, idolatry has a modern tack, a modern aspect of it that shows up in our everyday world. So today we're going to take a look at how it shows up. We're going to also reflect on how mindfulness might help us to choose again. And then we're going to conclude with a practical application, a simple approach for identifying how those idols are showing up and what they might be. So the word itself, I love looking up definitions. The word itself is synonymous with adoration, reverence, veneration, glorification. An idol is anything that takes our focus off of our God self and puts it on something else. Archaeologists tell us that every culture throughout history have had idols, and these have all been such that it's a trend. Man has a desire to turn people or things into objects of worship. Anyone ever notice that? Yeah. So let's listen to a conversation between a father and his two young sons. The father asks, "What is an idol?" And they replied, "Anything that you love more than God." And he goes on to say, "But people still have idols, right?" And the boys say, "Sure, like money, or the Wii, or a puppy, or a burrito." So how do you know if something truly is an idol? How do you know if you love something more than God? The father continues. And they were silent for a moment before considering the question. Then the younger of the two boys, a very thoughtful 8-year-old, replied, "You know it's an idol if you think you could never be happy without it." Now that's a huge thing for us to consider, isn't it? Yeah. The wisdom of children is always very profound. I think they teach me more than I could ever teach them. So as a preteen, I remember having a picture of this glorious young man hanging on the wall of my room. He had this dark hair with a little curl in the middle of his forehead. He was wearing a velvet purple shirt. I think you might have heard of him, Elvis. So what I noticed was that one day I came home from school and my brother had taped a bandage across his eyes. Now, being a poster, it was impossible for me to get that off without ripping his eyes. So, alas, my idol had lost his value. And we have this happen in our lives. Things that we began to hold in high regard and high esteem, for whatever reason, can lose their value over time. Something might age. Something might break that we had used and had been of service to us. And for me, as life went on, I found myself placing undue value on other things besides a poster on the wall. Relationships, possessions, money, career, achievement, all of these things that are part of the human construct. And my sense of self had become entwined in the possessions and the goals of life. Those things had begun to own me more than I could have imagined as I transferred my sense of worth into the accomplishments and the haves of life. You see, this is what Father Richard Rohr, anyone familiar with his work? He's a Franciscan priest who lives in Albuquerque, amazing theologian. He refers to this as first half of life experience. And he shares that we have to go through this process of owning, having, and doing so that we may be able to appreciate the value in allowing and being. It's beautiful circle. The book of Exodus, the story of the Israelites' liberation from Egypt, and a part of the Torah, offers us 10 instructions for living. We know these as the 10 Commandments. They guide us to what Father Richard calls the second half of life, or a life coming full circle into balance and harmony. And the first of these 10 charges is, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." We've all heard that. And we don't let anything be our source, our holy comforter, our one true presence, or our absolute good. There is only one presence and power in the universe and in my life: God, the good, omnipotence. We kind of probably heard that somewhere before. Now, is this really true all the time? For example, one day we might learn that the Dow is dropped by hundreds of points and we respond with worry about our investments. Or perhaps on another day we might discover that our spouse has found a new love interest and react with worry about our marriage. Or we might learn a friend has been diagnosed with a terminal disease and experience concern about their life and their family. Now, friends, these are all normal human experiences and normal human reactions. There's nothing wrong with having them. But what I'm offering today is that staying in them, entrenching ourselves in worry, is what shifts our energy from seeing things rightly to what we call, or what I call, awfulizing. I don't think you'll find that in Webster's. When we do this, we're worshiping at the feet of worry and lack. And we're feeding the false gods of poverty, separation, loneliness, despair, and abandonment. When we feed them, they grow and seem to have power in our lives. Now, I don't know if anyone else has ever done that, but I know of people who have. So let me share a story from the uncanonized section of the Bible. It's the Apocrypha. It's those books that are tucked in the middle of some Bibles. This particular one is entitled Bel and the Dragon, and this is verses 1 through 22. The section itself is Daniel and the Priest of Bel. It was written about the 2nd century BCE, so it's been around for a while. When King Astyages was laid to rest with his ancestors, Cyrus the Persian succeeded to his kingdom. Daniel was a companion of the king and was the most honored of his friends. Now the Babylonians had an idol they called Bel, and every day they provided for it 12 bushels of choice flour, 40 sheep, and 6 measures of wine. And for those who are curious, that's about 51 gallons. The king revered it and went daily to worship Bel, while Daniel worshipped his own God. So the king said to him, "Why do you not worship Bel?" And he answered, "Because I do not revere idols made by humans. The living God is who I worship, the one who created heaven and earth and has dominion over all living creatures." The king said to him, "Do you not think Bel is a living God? Do you not see how much he eats and drinks every day?" And Daniel laughed and said, "Do not be deceived, O king, for this thing is only clay inside and bronze outside. It never ate nor drank anything." The king was angry and called to his priest. To the priest he said, "If you do not tell me who is eating these provisions, you shall die. But if you prove Bel is eating them, Daniel shall die, because he has spoken blasphemy against Bel." Daniel said to the king, "Let it be done as you have said." Now there were 70 priests of Bel, besides their wives and children. So the king went with Daniel into the temple. The priest of Bel said, "See, we are now going outside, and you yourself, O king, set out the food, prepare the wine, and shut the door, and seal it with your signet. When you return in the morning, you will not find that Bel has eaten. If you do not find Bel has eaten at all, we will die. Otherwise, Daniel will die." They were unconcerned, for beneath the table they had a hidden entrance, through which they used to go in regularly and consume the provisions. After they'd gone out, the king set out the food for Bel. Then Daniel ordered his servants to bring ashes, and they scattered them throughout the temple in the presence of the king alone. They went out, they shut the door, and sealed it with the king's signet, and departed. During the night, the priests came as usual with their wives and children and ate and drank everything. Early in the morning, the king arrived with Daniel, and he said, "Are the seals unbroken, Daniel?" He answered, "They are." As soon as the doors were opened, the king looked at the table and shouted in a loud voice, "You are great, O Bel, and in you there is no deceit at all." Daniel laughed and restrained the king from going in. "Look at the floor and notice whose footprints are here." The king said, "I see footprints of men, women, and children." The king was enraged and arrested the priests and their wives and children, showed him the secret doors, and the king put them to death. He gave Bel over to Daniel, who destroyed it and the temple. Now, 70 priests and their families, that's a lot of people to put to death, and in our modern day world, we would think of that as pretty harsh. In Unity, we tend to look at Scripture metaphysically. So this morning we're going to give a little bit more insight into this story. Cyrus was the Babylonian king, and what he represented was animal consciousness, that level of consciousness that's about survival, and all of that is impacted by the external world. The idol at Bel, the temple, the worship, things he could see, touch, feel, all of that sense consciousness piece. And as his friend, Daniel understood this state of mind just as we understand our own animal nature. He knew Cyrus represented the will ruling those senses, and the priest of Cyrus represented religious guidance of the intellect. Their number, 70, breaks down into 7 times 10. 7 is manifestation in the physical realm, and 10 amplifies or magnifies that 7. So that manifestation in the physical realm was this huge idol named Bel. It was really fascinating. What he realized, though, is that Cyrus was able to see from his animal nature, and he asked the priests to prove that Bel was consuming the offerings. They were to provide intellectual proof of a spiritual being in the physical realm. Now, meanwhile, Daniel is one who represents spiritual judgment, pure judgment, conscious integrity, and who typifies the clear, penetrating insight of spirit. And the question that comes from this, when we look at the animal nature and the higher nature, that spiritual nature that's in each one of us, is it possible to actually intellectually prove God? Yeah. So Daniel was inviting that animal nature to see beyond appearance. Because Cyrus was of that sense consciousness, he was a Missouri kind, if you will. Show me. And he wanted to see. He wanted to know from that level of consciousness. And we can relate Daniel to our own intuitive guidance. You know, that sense of I call it God gut, when something comes up and we go, ooh, I should be doing, or I could be doing. And that is our indwelling nature of direction, good orderly direction for that matter. Our higher self does not ignore or pretend the human experience is not happening. We nurture that. We honor it. We show it what it needs to know. And then we continue to operate from that higher self. From the higher self, Daniel offered evidence for Cyrus, and the death of the priests and their families, metaphysically, was the death or releasing of the belief that part of the human consciousness, that part that relies on religious guidance through the intellect. Because again, how can we intellectually prove God? So, Daniel's consciousness or higher self lived beyond the priestly consciousness, that consciousness that was relying on thought. And in this story, we weave all the key players into one and see in our higher self, we do, of course, have dominion over animal consciousness. Because spiritual judgment, pure judgment, conscious integrity, and clear penetrating insight of spirit lives beyond any other awareness in every one of us. It's seen beyond the physical into the realm of the spiritual, and this is what we often refer to as faith. So I'd like to take a look at what a modern day theologian says about faith. Anyone here familiar with Marcus Borg? He's an amazing scholar. And he was an American New Testament scholar, as a matter of fact, a theologian and an author. He was among the most widely known and influential voices in progressive Christianity, as well as a man that I knew as a great teacher. He shares this: without questioning, blind faith is idolatrous. just as patriotism without questioning risks becoming idolatrous nationalism. Faith without questioning risks becoming idolatrous religion. He goes on to share that when faith is defined as unquestioning acceptance of tenets and traditions, the object of faith is no longer God, but the tenets and traditions. Something other than God has been given an absolute status, which is what makes it idolatrous. This something is a human construct. Questioning prevents us from thinking there can ever be a final formulation of the way things are. Our words and concepts, no matter how sacred or scientific, can only point to a stupendous and wonderful mystery beyond all language, because pointing is their only purpose. None of our tenets or traditions can be the final word because they are human creations, and to think of them as absolute is to give them a status that belongs to God alone. Idolatry has little to do with worshiping. Rather, it is being dedicated to an option other than God. If we're mindful in our deepening relationship with God, as with meditation and prayer, it's impossible for our lives to remain unchanged. And I think that's an important point, because that spiritual practice is what nurtures and feeds our higher self, our connection, our conscious connection with the Spirit. Idol worship can be done without one realizing it, how much power, respect, and reverence that they are lending to someone or something other than God may not be clear. This seems simple enough. Don't worship anything other than God. Yet without questioning, our very faith can be idolatrous. So what about our possessions? There seems to be a moment of realization when we awaken to the idea that our possessions owned us more than we owned them. Anybody ever have that experience? Yeah. So for me, I noticed it wasn't so much a point of overwhelm as it was a point of surrender to be able to have that experience. I found myself surrendering to the temporal nature of things. Things come and go. They don't last. And that is just how possessions are. They're transient. And even the people in our lives come and go. There's a flow. And another type of ownership comes in the form of successes. We find ourselves called to feel accomplishment at the size of our bank accounts or the number of possessions or friends that we might have. These triumphs, if you will, are just as transient as soap bubbles. One minute they're bright, beautiful, shiny, and glowy, and the next, poof, gone. And yes, these are all worthy human endeavors that will disappear, but that allow us to begin to gain strength and honor who we have come here to be in this world. The truth is that spiritual success is not transient. It's not subject to human frailty, and it's not temporal in any way. The unity definition of success includes the attainment of desired goals, yes. And it comes as the result of faithfulness and earnestness in application of God's law. When someone chooses to console themselves with the thought that it is God's will for us to fail, I would like to share that failure is never God's will. It is man who lays the charge of God to excuse his own feeling of inadequacy and defeat. God's will is health, happiness, and prosperity for everyone. And to have all that is good and beautiful is to express God's will for us. Success is to emulate our master teacher and way shower, and to love one another as he loved us, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. There's a story from The Wounded Healer by Henri Nouwen, and it tells a tale from ancient India. You see, there are 4 royal brothers who decided to master a special ability, and time went on. They studied these skills, and then they came back together. The first had learned to take the bone of a creature and create the flesh. The second learned to grow the skin and hair. The third, limbs. And the fourth, to breathe life into this completed creature. The brothers went to the jungle to find a bone and reveal their skills. They collaborated and ultimately gave life to the lion. And the lion was standing before them. As it shook its mane, the ferocious beast then arose and jumped on his creators, killing them all, and vanishing contentedly into the jungle. My friends, we too have the capacity to create that which can devour us. Yes, we do. Goals can consume us, dreams can overpower us, possessions and property can turn and destroy us. And when we do not allow the wisdom of the still small voice to direct us, we can find ourselves at the mercy of our creations. So ours is to simply go within, to the kingdom of God, and to seek that first, and trust in our indwelling Christ as our good and perfect director. Now, we don't face a pantheon of false gods like the Israelites did, but we do have other things: materialism, love of leisure, security, and others. The second commandment does talk about idols, that thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. And this may be something hard to relate to unless we include life goals that revolve around something other than God. What is the object of our affection, effort, and attention? Where does the majority of our time go? On what do we spend the greatest amount of our resources? These are questions that can invite us to take it a little bit more deeply. Which of these things in our lives hold such esteem that we don't believe we could ever be happy without them? Yes, there are many, and please understand it isn't about imagining our lives without these things, especially if they fall in the category of people. But it's more about realizing where our money, where our time, where our attention is going. You see, that 8-year-old boy that talked about happiness was wise beyond his years. At the very core of our being, we know true contentment, satisfaction, and worth, true joy, true fulfillment are to be found in that indwelling Christ. And even if everything were taken away, as with the story of Lot, we would still have our divine inheritance, our I am, our true nature, because this is infallible. Perhaps uncovering our hidden idols might be an interesting adventure, and let's see how that might work. I've heard it said that where our time and our money go, this is where we find value in our lives. We can look at our bank account, we can look at the 24 hours in a day and see how that is spending for us and know that these are the things we value. And so I invite us without blame or shame to consider over the next week simply creating categories, areas of time and areas of finance. Finance might be housing, it might be insurance, it might be child care, it might be entertainment, whatever those categories are. And then create categories of time, things that might include service to others, work, leisure. All of those pieces are parts of this whole that we call our lives. And again, without blame or shame, just notice. Just begin to make a log. Write it down, use a computer program, whatever you prefer. And look at how these things are showing up. Those that are high numbers at the end of the week, is this the source of true happiness in my life? You could certainly ask that question, but we can take that even deeper. Where is God in this? Where is God in this particular situation? And how are we showing up to be connected with and the presence of God? So that whole process is simply that of going within and allowing, listening to that still small voice. Anytime we're feeling exhausted, this process can be helpful too, because a drain on our energy can come from a drain on our time or a drain on our finances. Take a moment and take a look. There's something powerful and empowering about being fully aware and present in our own lives. It's from this place of mindfulness that we're able to manifest true and lasting change. When we can see it, then we can do something that we might choose to do to make our lives a little bit different. I'd like to share a quote from Siddhartha, that beautiful young man that we know as the Buddha. Our highest state of being is to be present in this moment. This is our truest spiritual practice. The secret of health is not to mourn the past or worry about the future. It is to live in the present moment. And so it is. And let us begin our meditation with some beautiful music.
This is an old unity hymn by my idol, Carmen Mosier. I now let go. There's nothing to fear. I now let go. There's nothing to fear. I now let go. There's nothing to fear. I now let go. I now let go. There's nothing to fear. I realize there's only one power. 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 I realize I'm one with the one. I realize I'm one with the one. I realize I'm one with the one. I realize I'm one with the one.
And as we become comfortable right where we are, I invite you to close your outer eyes and simply be in this moment. Mindful of your feet on the floor, mindful of the chair supporting you. And focus your attention on your breath. Breathing in and letting go. In this very room, in this moment, there is only one presence, one power. And we allow that awareness to move in and through us. We feel it connecting with our sacred heart. And we allow this time to simply be one in which we find our heart opening to receive wisdom from God, from the Great Spirit. As we do so, just gently allowing and being in in this moment. So we allow the beautiful sound of the rain stick to take us just a little bit deeper into consciousness, deeper into our awareness of God. We feel gratitude. Gratitude for this time, gratitude for one another, gratitude for this ministry. And we simply know in this moment, God. And when you are ready, I invite you to gently return your attention back to this time and space. And to simply open your beautiful eyes.
We at Unity in the Heart of Austin are committed to inspiring people to awaken to their unique divine nature through spiritual teachings, through heart-to-heart connections, through prayer, and through sacred service. And we provide tools, spiritual tools, that allow you to live your best possible life. I'm Reverend Tony Roebuck, minister at Unity in the Heart of Austin, and I truly hope that you are inspired by and that you are transformed by, you enjoy this week's spiritual message. And if you would like to leave a donation, a tithe, to help the work of this ministry in supporting you and others like you, then we are truly grateful for your generosity and for helping to make the world a better place. Because we know that life is meant to be good.